Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm going to be presenting very briefly a background and the approach and the key findings and recommendations arising from the EPA-funded DeTER Project, which was completed together with colleagues at NUI Galway, UCD, AIT and Ulster University. The final report on this project was just published last August, and there are a number of copies available outside, and there's also a poster on the project available to view outside also. So before we start talking about silver nanoparticles, it's important to define exactly what a nanoparticle is, and there is some debate in the literature as to what constitutes a nanoparticle, but the European Commission defines a nanoparticle as something in the size range of 1 nanometre to 100 nanometres, so very small, somewhere between a glucose molecule and a virus particle. Nanoparticles can either be naturally occurring, such as viruses, inadvertently produced, such as soot following combustion, or engineered. And engineered nanomaterials or nanoparticles are intentionally produced to exhibit unique properties. And what are these nanoparticles being used for, these engineered nanomaterials being used for? They have a very wide range of applications, from household products to personal care products to textiles and fabrics. They're used in medicine, and they're used also for soil and water remediation processes. So these are the hidden chemicals that Professor DePledge spoke about earlier on. The Technical University of Denmark developed the nano database, and there are currently 3,036 nanomaterials listed on that database. It's a live inventory of nanomaterials that's updated regularly. We decided in the DeTER project to focus particularly on silver nanoparticles because silver has been used for centuries due to its antibacterial properties. If you insert the search term into publication searches, you see a significant increase in the number of publications referring to silver nanoparticles in recent years. And if you insert the search term silver into the nano database, you find that 539 nanomaterials or products containing silver as a nanoparticle are listed on the nano database. The annual global consumption of nanosilver has been estimated at between 55 and 450 tonnes per year, and there's potential for the release of these silver nanoparticles from these materials during manufacture, use and disposal. And some studies have found that for some nanofunctionalized textiles, 100% of the silver nanoparticles are released in the washing process into the environment. So there's concern that the unique properties of these engineered nanomaterials can result in hazards for both the environment and human health. Nanoparticles can be released to various environmental matrices, again during manufacture, use and disposal, and there's a potential risk to humans through contact, inhalation and ingestion. The EU REACH regulations are there to provide protection to public health and the environment from the use of chemicals, but there's no consensus as to how the REACH regulations apply to engineered nanomaterials. The SCEP Nanomaterials and REACH report published in 2011 concluded that most of the REACH provisions and assessment tools aren't appropriate to evaluate the safety of nanomaterials. So in response to this, Professor Stefan Foss Hansen of the Danish Technical University's Environment section recently developed or published a new regulatory, or suggested a new regulatory framework to tackle this issue. So this includes registration, evaluation, authorization and categorization or labeling section. He recommends that manufacturers of nanomaterials should be required to register the nanomaterials prior to commercialization and independent of the production or import volumes, and that all uses of nanomaterials should be evaluated according to the nano-risk categorization developed. So he's indicated 5 risk categories, and these can then be ranked based on risk from high, medium to low to, indeed, also unfortunately unknown. So this is the nano risk categorization that's applied to materials listed on the nano database. And again, if we look at silver, the top 2 products there are unfortunately supplements being sold under the health and fitness, home and garden, food and beverage categories. All of those would reach the high risk category across all of the different 5 categories that he has listed under his framework. So what are the regulation on engineered nanomaterials in Europe? Well, France are certainly leading the way in this. France currently oblige all companies to declare the quantities and uses of substances at nanoscale produced, distributed or imported to the French National Agency for Food Safety, Environment and Labour, so ANSES. Belgium, Denmark and Norway have also initiated similar inventories of products, and Italy, Germany, Sweden and the UK are also proposing to introduce some form of regulation in the near future. So what of Ireland? Well, through the DeTER Project, we contacted a variety of sectors and we just don't know where nanomaterials are being produced, used or disposed of. So one of the key recommendations arising from the DeTER Project is the need for Ireland to follow other European countries in terms of trying to understand, before we can understand the environmental and human health risk, understand where they're actually being used and imported in the first place. So what impact do silver nanoparticles potentially have on human health and the environment? Well, unfortunately, again, we just don't know. The evidence is lacking and safe levels haven't yet been established. Several studies have shown that nanoparticles in consumer products can accumulate in water, but the majority of these studies currently rely solely on modelling data, because there's a lack of available methods to actually monitor the aquatic environment for the presence of nanomaterials, and there's also a lack of data in the scientific literature on the toxicity of nanoparticles in natural water environments. So the aims of the DeTER Project were to develop and implement a method for the detection, quantification and characterisation of silver nanoparticles in water, to determine the toxicological properties of the silver nanoparticles in the aquatic environment, and to develop a risk assessment protocols that could be used to evaluate the environmental fate and likely risk from silver nanoparticles through aquatic pathways. I don't have a lot of time to go into the absolute detail of this today, but very briefly, the detection work or the development of a method for detection was carried out at NUI Galway, primarily by Dr. Owen McGillicuddy, the postdoctoral researcher working on the project. We decided to look at charcoal as a potential material for capture because it's widely used as an adsorbent material in water purification processes. We found that if you increased the surface area of the charcoal, that increased the level of capture of silver nanoparticles from waters. So essentially we milled down the charcoal, and we used a grade of charcoal that's used widely in the water purification processes. Very often the silver nanoparticles are coated with different coatings depending on the function or the material that they're going to be placed into. And again, nanomaterials or nanoparticles can come in a range of sizes from 1 to 100. So we evaluated a range of coatings and different sizes and found that regardless of the coating or the size, at lower concentrations you could capture an increased amount of the silver nanoparticles using charcoal. So very briefly, we believe that activated charcoal is a suitable material for the capture of silver nanoparticles from water, and also potentially represents a cost-effective material for the capture and remediation of not only silver nanoparticles but other nano-wastes from the aquatic environment. The toxicology work was carried out by colleagues at Athlone Institute of Technology, namely Dr. Andy Fogarty and Mr. Ian Murray. And they applied a multitrophic test battery, so they evaluated the toxicity of silver nanoparticles to primary producers, in this case Pseudoquerchnarella subcapitata, primary consumers, Daphnia magna, and secondary consumers, Hydra attenuata in this case. They used standard ISO methods which recommend using media containing EDTA, and not to get too technical, they evaluated an EDTA-free media. And if you just look here at the results, you can see that the toxicity ranges are in the microgram per litre range for each of the different trophic levels. So the key findings, and again this is very brief, from the toxicology work indicate that EDTA-free medias are a much more sensitive test to use rather than the recommended EDTA-containing medias, and that the effect of silver on the regeneration of Hydra attenuata is, we feel, the most environmentally relevant bioassay to use. The risk assessment work was completed by colleagues at UCD, namely Dr. Enda Cummins and Mr. David Shevlin. This adopted a 5-step approach that ultimately led to the development of an aquatic risk model and a drinking water treatment model which could indicate the risk of human exposure. Based on the modelling that was carried out, a large literature survey was carried out through the risk assessment process as well on previous models that were completed in this area. And the predicted environmental concentrations based on modelling of silver nanoparticles are in the low nanogram per litre range. So an order of magnitude lower than the toxicity values we saw through the toxicology work. So there appears to be a low risk at the moment to human health based on these predicted environmental concentrations, and for the drinking water models and the scenarios considered in this work, there doesn't appear to be any existing risk from silver nanoparticle residues following drinking of water. So the key recommendations arising from the DeTER project are that we feel an Irish national inventory of all products containing nanoparticles should be established and updated on a regular basis. Now that we feel we've developed a convenient and cost-effective capture method, it's important now to actually evaluate the environment to know for sure what concentrations of nanoparticles are present in the Irish environment, that there's a need for international bodies to harmonise a suite of toxicology bioassays to appropriately risk assess silver nanoparticles. And given the rapid uptake of nanotechnology in recent years across all sectors, it's likely that these materials will become more abundant in the environment and could consequentially have an impact on human health. So there's a need to consider monitoring for these, and that these should be re-evaluated on an ongoing basis. There's a number of publications that have arisen from this work already, and there's a number of publications in draft. And I'd just finally like to thank the Environmental Protection Agency for funding the work, the project team, who were great to work with, and the project steering committee for advice throughout. And just if I have my last 12 seconds, just to mention, NUI Galway and Teagasc were successful in a bid to host the first annual scientific meeting of the One Health European Joint Programme in Dublin from May 22nd to 24th next year. The One Health European Joint Programme is a consortium of 38 institutes across Europe who will all be coming to Dublin next May to discuss foodborne zoonosis, antimicrobial resistance and emerging contaminants. So I encourage you all to come along and attend. Thank you.